what has happened today, both in healthcare policy and an extraordinary policy change in the Justice Department and its big effect on the presidential campaign. Democratic presidential campaign strategists believe that the Trump administration has just handed them their most effective campaign policy strategy against President Trump. One of the jobs of the Attorney General in the Justice Department is to defend the federal government's position in litigation, but not anymore. That's not what the Trump Justice Department does now. The Justice Department has almost always defended the government's position, even when it is an inherited policy position from a previous administration. But last night, Attorney General William Barr authorized the Justice Department to switch sides, in effect, in a case involving the Affordable Care Act. Instead of defending the government's position, the Trump Justice Department is now supporting the other side of the litigation that would completely dismantle the Affordable Care Act, taking health insurance away from 21 million people. Here is Speaker Nancy Pelosi's reaction today to the Trump administration's attempt, once again, to completely repeal the Affordable Care Act, this time through the courts.
The GOP will never stop trying to destroy the affordable health care of America's families. In this House, with a Democratic majority, we're here to strengthen those protections and to lower health care costs further. Because this House, this Democratic House, is for the people.
The Democrats already held a big advantage on health care policy over President Trump and the Republicans. That's the #1 issue that won back the House of Representatives for the Democrats. In exit polling last year after the congressional election, 41% said it was their #1 issue. 57% now say they believe Democrats would do a better job on pre-existing conditions versus 35% who say Republicans would do a better job of handling that issue. Now that his administration is once again actively trying to take away health care protections for people with pre-existing conditions and take away health insurance from 20 million people. President Trump, of course, said today, quote, "The Republican Party will soon be known as the party of health care." Polling shows that voters believe that the Democratic Party is the party of health care. Presidential candidate Bernie Sanders said this to Chris Hayes earlier tonight about the Justice Department's actions.
I'm going to do everything that I can to tell the American people, including the many people who voted for Trump, that he is an absolute fraud, as you've just indicated. He talked in his campaign about health care for everybody and then supported legislation that would throw over 30 million people off the health care that they have. So we have got to expose him for what he is, and we have got to talk about where we should be going as a country.
According to polling, the Republicans have already succeeded in labeling themselves as the party that wants to take away health care. Here's presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg reacting to President Trump's latest attempt to eliminate the Affordable Care Act through the courts.
This seems to be the position they hold deep down. Just take this health care coverage away from millions of Americans. As a matter of political strategy, I'm a little bit surprised because, most Americans want this. And so at this moment when they were going to take a victory lap around what was happening in Washington, suddenly they're reminding us why so many of us are Democrats.
Leading off our discussion now, Ezra Levin. You heard about him during Rachel's last hour. He's the executive director of the Indivisible Project. Jason Johnson is with us. He's the politics editor at theroot.com and a professor of politics and media at Morgan State University. He's also an MSNBC political analyst. And Bret Stephens, columnist for the New York Times and an MSNBC contributor, joins our discussion tonight. And Jason, I want to begin with you on the point that Pete Buttigieg just made, which is here's the Republicans in the glow of what they, I think, in an overreaction to a letter from the Attorney General about the Mueller report, are kind of claiming as a victory moment in the evolution of the Mueller report. And they, in effect, politically step on it by making this move to once again, this time through the courts, remove the Affordable Care Act as an option in American life.
I mean, Republicans, take their car to a car wash and then park it under birds. They cannot figure out how to be successful for more than 20 minutes without screwing it up again. Look, this is Mayor Pete is correct. Bernie Sanders is correct. Every Democrat is correct. The single greatest issue that Democrats have been able to run on over the last 3 or 4 years has been health care. The Republicans, when they controlled the House and Senate, and the presidency, not only could they not get rid of the ACA, but they couldn't figure out a way to replace it and solve some of the very clear problems that they've been talking about for 10 years. So this is an absolute boon for the Democratic Party. This helps in state-level elections that are going to happen in 2019. It helps into 2020, and it demonstrates again that the Republican Party, led by Donald Trump, has no messaging or policy discipline.
Ezra Levin, as Rachel was discussing, your organization has now stepped forward, Indivisible, with an effort, a public effort to force the release of the Mueller report. But you are also the organization that basically drove the Democratic strategies in many of the campaigns, helping with various issues that elected this new Democratic House of Representatives, healthcare being the number one. Two things. Talk about the real effect of this policy if the Trump administration is successful in court, and if this does mean the end of the Affordable Care Act. What does that mean to 21 million people? And then secondly, what would be the result of it in the presidential campaign?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. We've watched this movie before, and we know exactly how it's going to turn out for the Republicans. You know, what they're trying to do is roll back Medicaid expansion in 37 states. They're trying to gut protections for folks with pre-existing conditions. They're trying to throw young people off their families' insurance. This isn't popular. They tried to do it, and actually, you know, this week is the 2-year anniversary of when the House of Representatives, under then Speaker Paul Ryan, tried and failed on a vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act. They failed in the House of Representatives that time because it was so unpopular. They eventually did get it through the House, but they ultimately weren't able to get it through the Republican Senate because this is so deeply unpopular. And what I will say is, you know, we saw these indivisible groups all over the country holding die-ins, holding protests, doing letters in 2017. This helped put pressure on the political system that made it impossible to get through the legislature. And then those exact same groups were the groups that were registering voters, that were endorsing candidates, and that were getting out the vote in 2018. So I think this policy from the Trump administration is a moral abomination, but I also just think it's politically stupid. They're setting themselves up for a repeat of the 2018 blue wave, and we took out the House of Representatives in 2018. We'll take out the White House and the Senate in 2020.
Bret, some Democrats were struggling with how to handle the question of Medicare for all, for or against. For example, a candidate, say like Joe Biden, we don't know where he is or what his response is on that now. And with this, the Republicans and the Trump administration move the ball back to where it was in the 2 years of the Trump administration. They move it back to the Affordable Care Act. And so, for example, Kamala Harris campaign tonight, her tweet, Trump and his administration are trying to take health care away from tens of millions of Americans again. We must fight back again with everything we've got. And in 2020, we need to elect a president who will make health care a right. And so it seems they've moved the line of scrimmage. Republicans, in respect, the president has moved the line of scrimmage back to a spot where they already lost.
Well, I'm not sure how the politics of this play out. I hope Ezra's right, but a couple points I think the audience should bear in mind. What Trump is doing here is a pure base play. Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, remains profoundly unpopular with the Republican base, and even talking about wanting to see its repeal is appealing to the sweet spot. The second thing I think the Trump administration is trying to do is trying to say, well, what's the Democratic alternative? The Democratic alternative is Medicare for all. That, they will argue, is unaffordable. It shows the Democrats can't be trusted with the fisc. I think that's the strategy. Actually, in some ways, the way I see this really helping Democrats is it's going to force them, require them to defend the Affordable Care Act, which is now broadly popular as the existing system with all of its imperfections, rather than go for advocacy of a Medicare for all system, which I think is not going to help Democrats in 2020. I could be wrong, but that's my guess.
Well, that is in effect a rephrasing of what I was just saying. I think we actually agree on this. And Jason, before we dwell completely on the politics of this, we are talking about 21 million people whose only access to health care is through this legislation. I know many of these people, and it is it is something that they are living on, quite literally living on. We're going to hear those stories.
Right.
Those stories are going to be brought forward. We're going to see those people. We will surely probably have them on programs like this because this is something that has become the thing that is actually sustaining their lives. And President Trump now is once again actively trying to take it away.
Well, President Trump isn't just actively trying to take it away because he has some policy alternative. It's because he's hostile. It's because he's angry. It's because he hates Obama's legacy. And Lawrence, I remember you give a perfect example of this. When we had the government shut down, that was a mini version of what can happen when people's access to government-funded or government-supported health care can magically be taken away. Remember, I talked about one of my students who had to deal with cancer treatments, people not being able to get to the NIH. All sorts of things happened just during the government shutdown. If they were to eliminate the Affordable Care Act through the courts, not through a gradual process, but through the courts, it would basically be like the government shutdown for all health care in America immediately. There would be deaths. That's not hyperbole. That's not something Democrats would have to make up. And all of that death and all of that suffering and all of those harmed families would be on the hands of the Republican Party. Trump doesn't care, but I think there's many Republicans in the House and Senate who recognize that that is a death sentence for them politically, if not practically, for many millions of Americans.
Ezra, with your organization now working in a new territory, which is the release of the Mueller report, is there any crossover here in what's happening in terms of the political energy that you bring to the Mueller report and then this Justice Department action on the Affordable Care Act?
Oh, yeah. So, I was talking with Grapevine Indivisible, which is in the Dallas area, a very red area. They've been holding weekly meetings every week, stretching back to 2017, and they held their meeting yesterday after the release of the Barr memo. And I heard from Heather, the leader of that group, that she quoted Glinda of Oz, that you've had the power all along, my dear. You just had to learn it for yourself. That the groups view their job as building up activists and activism in their communities and fighting back wherever they can. And they don't count on anybody else to ride in on a white horse and save them. They're building this up themselves. And so if that means fighting to make sure that the report comes out, they're going to do that. If that means fighting to protect the Affordable Care Act, they're going to do that. If that means fighting against whatever else comes out of this administration, they're going to do that. And they're doing that in 2019 because that's the right fight to fight. But in doing that, they're also building up their strength. They're building up their membership. They're building up the force that is going to build the wave in 2020.
So, Bret, Bill Barr is the most experienced Attorney General, perhaps the most experienced Attorney General we've ever had since he's been Attorney General before. He's been in this position as Attorney General where he has been defending government policies of previous administrations. He has watched his administration policies be defended by subsequent attorneys general of other parties, which makes this so fascinating. Brings us to breaking news reporting from Politico right now saying William Barr was opposed to this switch. It says Politico is saying the heads of the Justice Department and Health and Human Services Department opposed the unexpected switch in legal tactics. The Trump administration's surprising move to invalidate Obamacare on Monday came despite the opposition of two key cabinet secretaries, Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar and Attorney General Bill Barr.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a familiar story with the Trump administration and anyone who serves in it that at some point, and in Attorney General Barr's case, that point has come very quickly, you have to choose between your position in government and your integrity as a person. Jim Mattis discovered that. Rex Tillerson discovered that. To some extent, even Jeff Sessions discovered that. And that's happening very soon here.
And Ezra, I just want to go back to you on the policy issues here as they interact with the campaign. And I could just read a stack of tweets from every one of the presidential campaigners tonight on this specifically. In reviving the fight over the Affordable Care Act now, do you think that will actually overshadow the debate within the Democratic field about Medicare for all?
Yeah, well, I think we can walk and chew gum. I think we need to fight back against the worst that this administration is doing, but I don't think we can be scared to talk about what our vision for the future is going to be. Look, we're going to have the House, the Senate, and the presidency in 2021, and we got to have some plans about how we're going to use it.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Ezra Levin, Jason Johnson, and Bret Stephens, thank you all for starting us off tonight. Really appreciate that.